My name is Adam Scott and my date of birth was the 20th of July 1958. My family history, to the best of my knowledge, really starts with my grandparents. My paternal grandparents came to this country at the beginning of the 20th century from Odessa and Poland respectively. My maternal grandparents were both born in this country. My parents owned a travel agency in the Narrow Way in Mare Street in Hackney. Originally, when my father came out of the Air Force in 1948, he joined or started working for a chain of chemists called Easton's, one of which was at Victoria Park, one was at Pembury by Hackney Station, and the other was in the Narrow Way in Mare Street. There was a fourth out in Staines, as I remember. They were owned by a man called Simon Wolfe. He worked there as a pharmacist, and in the late 1950s, he took over the running of the chemist in the Narrow Way, and then he changed its usage from a dispensing chemist to a travel agency and a non-dispensing chemist. The family joke was we sold them holidays and suntan lotion at the same time. He was a councillor for initially the Dalston ward in Hackney and then the Brownswood ward. He rose through the ranks doing a number of different posts within the council organisation, but ended up as chairman of finance. He was also heavily involved in health matters in Hackney and East London. He was the first chairman of the Community Health Council for City and Hackney. He was on the Area Health Authority for City and East London, and he was the deputy chairman of Homerton Hospital. In fact, was very heavily involved in the closing of the old Hackney Hospital and the building of the Homerton Hospital that replaced it. My mother worked with my father in the travel agency for some 40 years. As I say, they started it in 1960-ish and then finished in 1999 when they retired. There was a flat above the shop. The first floor was the sitting room and the kitchen. The next floor up was originally 2 bedrooms, one of which was, the larger of the 2 bedrooms was divided into 2, which I shared with, there was a partition wall that I shared with my parents, and my sister had the other room. And in the attic area, my maternal grandfather had a workshop. He was a furrier, and it's where he made fur coats. So growing up, I can remember going up to his workshop and there were mink and lamb furs scattered all over the floor. When he retired, my parents then converted the attic area into another bedroom that my sister occupied, and then when she went to university, she moved out and it became my bedroom. My parents were married in 1948. They had 2 children, myself and my sister. My sister is 4 years older than I am. My sister was born in the old German hospital, which was in Dalston, and I was born in the old Hackney hospital. We both went to Amherst Primary School, which was by Hackney Down Station. And then my sister went to Camden School for Girls, and I went to Central Foundation Grammar School for Boys. When I was growing up in Hackney, it was beginning to change. there was still a very large Jewish population in Hackney at that time, mainly people who had originally, or families who had originally come from Whitechapel, from Stepney, and moved north to the leafier suburbs of Hackney. My parents had both come from Whitechapel. My father grew up just off Valence Road, and my mother grew up originally, when she was born, in the Mothers Hospital in Commercial Road. Most of the fellow students at the school lived on the council estates up and down Pembury Road, so I spent a great deal of time in and around those estates, the LCC at the time, before it became the GLC, council estates, playing with friends on those estates and playing on Hackney Downs. Compared to most of the people that I grew up, or with whom I grew up, I had an enormously privileged background, because my parents, through their business, were pretty successful. I felt that I couldn't have really have grown up in a better place. I am immensely proud of the fact that I grew up in Hackney and have the most wonderful memories of doing so. I am grateful that my parents didn't move out to suburbia, because it gave me the sense of growing up in inner London and in a mixed and vibrant community. I started going to Brady when I was 14, at not necessarily the suggestion of, but it was facilitated by one of the boys in my class, Melvin Pedro. Melvin was a member of the club, but also there was another young man, Martin Harris, who at the time was the club captain, and he was also at Central Foundation. And because my parents knew Martin and his family, Martin lived on the Pembury estate in Hackney, my parents were happy to let me go to Brady to get the bus, the 253, from Mare Street to Whitechapel. And I can remember the first time I ever went, I met Melvin outside the London Hospital, and he then took me to Hanbury Street from there. Before that, I didn't have much experience or connection with Jewish youth community other than at school. My parents had both been members of different Jewish youth clubs in their teens, my father at Hackney and my mother at Stamford Hill. And they had met via the circuit, and at that time there was still a large number of Jewish youth clubs throughout the East End, although I believe Oxford and St George's had closed by that time, and Stepney Lads had closed at that time. So in Whitechapel, I think it was really only Brady. But one night after I had not long joined club, I was walking up Hanbury Street to the club, and the club had a gym, and I couldn't have been more than 15 yards from the front door of the club, and I was suddenly surrounded by about half a dozen boys. And from nowhere, a barber's razor magically appeared and was held against my throat. And I was on tiptoes at this time. And the only thing that I can remember was a voice saying, "Leave him alone, he looks really scared," which was the understatement of the year. I was, because they'd asked for money and I wasn't able to either get the money out of my pocket or actually say anything regarding the situation. These guys just walked off into the estate, and I went into club, and I can remember bumping into the club captain, Sean O'Leary, and another guy, Eddie Ezekiel, and then I was as white as a ghost. And they said, what happened? And they immediately, a group of the older boys, raced out of the door looking for these guys, but couldn't find them anywhere. That night, when I came to get my coat to go home, I put my coat on, and it was only then I realised that I had 2 slash marks where they'd cut my coat. It was a donkey jacket, a reefer jacket, as they used to be called. And that's when it really sunk in what had happened. And I was quite shaken. But it never put me off going back to club, which in itself is a bit of a memory and a bit of a story. I had never any worries about walking around anywhere in Hackney, across Hackney Downs, around Dalston Lane, Amherst Road, anywhere like that. And similarly, across the East End, I never had any, it never crossed my mind, even having the experience that I had, that there was any sense of danger. When I first joined Brady, it was a very interesting atmosphere because I had never up to that point mixed socially with a large number of girls. Having gone to an all-boys grammar school, suddenly there were girls on the horizon. And this was a sea change for me, going to club a couple of nights a week, playing football, table tennis, badminton. There were a variety of sports on offer, snooker, there was a weights room that I can remember. The unifying factor of the club for me was the fact that so many boys from school were at the club. There were a huge number of Central Foundation boys who were at the club on a regular basis, and then playing football for the club as well on a Sunday through the Association of Jewish Youth Football Leagues. Played basketball at the club. It was socially a very different environment, and certainly one that I hadn't come across before or been used to. And I will always be grateful to the club for establishing me in that environment. It taught me social skills that I didn't really have. And from there was a much greater sense of community. It didn't make me feel particularly Jewish because I hadn't been bar mitzvahed, and my parents were very much on the secular wing of Judaism rather than the religious wing. I couldn't speak Hebrew. When we used to go to Skeet, for example, Skeet Hill House, and prayers were said after supper, I had no idea what they were saying because I'd never been a part of that. The managers that I can remember, when I first joined, David Sylvester was the club leader, and a lady called Sonia Muscovich was the leader of the minors, or the younger group of members. Then when David left, a man called Uzi, and I can't remember Uzi's surname, became club leader. And after that, in my latter time there, it was Eric Finestone. There were other managers, helpers, volunteers, Bernard Mitchell, Brian Albert, Monty Parlovich. I wouldn't describe them as being particularly charismatic in the sense that they inspired me on to greater things. Although in my latter years at club, there was a leader, Eric Finestone, who was a very, very nice man. And I very much enjoyed his company, very intelligent man, and a very good sportsman. He had the respect of all of the members of the club. And I think that it was important as a guidance to keeping you on the straight and narrow, keeping you out of trouble, keeping you off the street, so to speak, and giving you something to do, giving you a base. One of the things that I always admired about the club was that anyone could join. Although it was predominantly a Jewish club, because the link with Central Foundation was so strong, many boys who weren't Jewish came to the club. It was that sense of unity amongst the club. We certainly had our own identity. You had to leave when you were 18, but some people stayed on a little bit longer to help out with younger ones. And you then joined the old Bradians at that kind of age. There was the possibility of going away at the weekends to Skeet Hill House, which were extraordinarily popular weekends away. I can remember the first time I went down to the house or the farm and coming back absolutely exhausted from sort of nights spent up till all hours pillow fighting and sleeping in dormitories with other boys that I'd never done before. And this was hugely exciting for me. The great thing about Skeet was that it was such a wonderful environment to grow up in. I can remember going down there initially on the transit or the coach, or by transit, bus or coach. And then as I got older, we'd go down on the train to Knockholt Station. Going to Skeet was a fantastic experience. The nights spent with ghost stories being told and going on night games on Lullingston Golf Course. And the very first pub I ever went to, I didn't get served in. One of the older boys bought me a drink in the pub there. And then the first camp that was there under canvas, I was part of the advance and rear party, which meant that you had to go down there a couple of days early, put up all the tents that people were sleeping in under canvas, and then staying a couple of days after and taking down all the tents and making sure the site was cleared up. That was fantastically good fun. And then I can remember marking out the football pitch in creosote by hand, and that was quite a labour of love as well. I never went to any of the summer camps in England at places like Cromer or the Isle of Wight. That was before my time. The only summer camps I ever went to were held at Skeet. I had never up to that point stayed out under canvas. Once we started going abroad, going to Belgium, I can particularly remember going to an army camp a disused army camp where we slept in the barracks. Then from there going on day trips to both Amsterdam and to Paris, which were remarkable experiences, but different in that we went as a group of kids. I had been away abroad on holiday with my parents before that, so I was no stranger to going to France. But going with your friends is a completely different environment. Quite often on a Sunday night, the club would have dances or discos. What tended to happen was that you'd play football in the afternoon, race home, have a bath or a shower, and then come back for the disco in the evening. In the cafeteria area, you would sit, talk, play records, play on the football machine. But there were also the club productions, the drama productions. I never took part in these things, but I can remember them being big events, and the awards night ceremonies. The legacy that I've been left with from my time at Brady has been by and large positive. The positives were that it gave me, through my teens and early 20s, a social group, and a very, very wide social group of people that I became friends with across North and East London. it taught me social skills, and it taught me how to interact with not only my own peer group, but with the opposite sex, who were my peer group, but boys as well as girls. But influences change. Once I'd left college and started to work, I was just moving in a different environment. And I'd left the club environment. And again, I stayed a little bit longer into the old Bradians, but I wanted to move away from it. I've often wondered if I've made enough effort to keep in touch with people that I knew from that time at club. But by and large, we all go our different ways. I tend to see 2 or 3 people, but again, I was at school with them. I'm grateful for my time at club. I had a wonderful experience there. And the trouble is that you look at places like youth clubs through the prism of one's own experience. Whether they are fit for the times and purpose now is a different argument. You can argue that there is still a need for youth clubs, for people, young people, to do organised activity, whatever that may be, whether it's sport, whether it's intellectual activity. There is a big problem now that because of the fears of grooming, would parents be as willing to allow their children to be involved in youth clubs as they once were? And my suspicion is probably not. As much as I think that youth clubs were great for me and were great of their time and allowed working class kids an environment in which they could safely grow and socialise, I think that they were of their time. And nowadays, kids look for different things. They spend more time with electronic sports as opposed to physical sports. And they are more acquisitive. There is more postcode violence between kids than there once was. I certainly never came across that in terms of postcode violence. Violence was, you could have it wherever you wanted if you went out looking for it. Society's changed. Whether youth clubs would work now on an organised basis, I really don't know. But there might be a place for them. But they demand a great deal of money to run with any sense of purpose. And whether that money will be forthcoming from any kind of government source is a different matter entirely.